On the outskirts of Los Angeles, nestled between nameless alleyways and avenues worn down by the footsteps of countless invisible people, there stood a pale brick building with rusted balconies. On the second floor, at the end of a perpetually damp hallway, lived the Ramirez family. Nobody knew much about them, not because they were hostile, but because they had learned, through fear and necessity, that the best way to survive was by staying unnoticed. If you're enjoying compelling stories like this one, be sure to hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications to stay up to date with all of our content. And let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. Hernan Ramirez, originally from a sweltering town in El Salvador, arrived in the United States at age 24, yet he carried a life story heavy enough for someone twice his age. His wide, calloused hands, toughened by work since he was 12, were his resume on every street corner where he looked for a job. He didn't speak much English, but he could build perfectly straight walls, weld without mistakes, and carry 3 times what his back was meant to handle. He was the type of man who said yes before the boss even finished his sentence. Time had etched a serene, almost stoic expression onto his face. His deep brown eyes didn't shine like before, but they still held a silent warmth, like embers that refused to die under the ash. He walked with a steady gait, even though his boots were torn at the toes, and every morning before he left for work, he would pause for a few seconds in front of the doors where his children slept. He never woke them. He would just gaze at them through the cracked opening and breathe deeply, as if that moment alone gave him the strength to endure the rest of the day. His wife, Alma, had a gentle voice and a strong spirit. She first met Hernan at a church in San Miguel when they were just teenagers. They crossed paths again years later, after the conflict in their country had destroyed far more than just homes. In El Salvador, Alma had been an elementary school teacher. In Los Angeles, she was everything and nothing at once: mother, makeshift nurse, home accountant, and guardian of a fragile world. She spoke Spanish slowly, peppered with Salvadoran expressions that would slip out even when she tried to hide them, hoping not to draw attention. They had 2 children: Camila, 10 years old, whose sharp mind made her seem older than she was, and Andres, 6, a whirlwind of energy who filled the apartment with laughter whenever fear gave him a break. Camila loved reading. She spent hours poring over books borrowed from a neighbor who worked at a community library. She had taught herself to read before the age of 5 by studying grocery labels and bus advertisements. Andres, for his part, spent his days creating stories with plastic toys and empty boxes, turning the living room into a battlefield or a spaceship, depending on his mood. But what defined the Ramirez family most wasn't poverty or their grueling routine or even fear. It was silence, a learned, cultivated, inherited silence. They had turned silence into a way of life. They never answered calls from unknown numbers. They didn't respond to surveys. They wouldn't open the door unless they were expecting someone. They asked few questions and revealed even less. In a city where everyone fought to stand out, they struggled to vanish. On weekends, while other Latino families filled the parks with grilled meats and music, the Ramirez family stayed home. Hernan took the opportunity to fix whatever time and use had worn down: a broken chair, a leaky pipe, a fan that refused to spin. Camila helped Alma make pupusas, an occasional treat to remind them of the roots still holding them together. Sometimes Alma would stare out the window for hours, watching neighbors come and go without fear, walking their dogs, lugging bags from the supermarket without worrying they might get stopped along the way. In those moments, she wondered if they would ever live that way, free from sudden jolts, free from hiding, free from the constant worry that the blare of a siren might be for them. The children didn't know the whole truth. They knew their father worked a lot, that they didn't have a car because it was too expensive, and that they couldn't travel because maybe someday, later on, they would. But they didn't grasp the real risk. They had no idea what undocumented meant. Hernan preferred it that way. He didn't want them growing up with that weight on their conscience. To him, love meant carrying that burden alone so that his children could walk a little lighter. And so the years went by. Each day seemed the same as the one before, yet each was also a quiet victory. Hernan making it home safely, Alma keeping the family together, Camilla dreaming of becoming a writer, Andres growing up unaware of the cracks in the world around him. Until one night, one seemingly ordinary night, changed everything. It was 4:15 in the morning when Hernan's eyes opened. He didn't need an alarm. His body had adjusted to the rhythm of those who have no other choice. He sat on the edge of the bed, rubbed his eyes, and spent a few moments staring at the bare wall in front of him. Hanging there by a rusty nail was a yellowed sheet of paper with a handwritten Bible verse. He gives strength to the weary and increases the power of the weak. It was his mantra, his shield, his encouragement. While the rest of the world slept, he got ready for another day's work in the city's hidden corners, an old t-shirt, patched up pants, worn-out boots, and a plastic lunchbox holding 2 tortillas, beans, and a thermos of strong coffee. He slicked his hair back with water, applied cheap deodorant, and left quietly, always quietly, so no one would wake. He didn't want his children seeing him depart into the darkness. The bus stop was 7 blocks from the apartment. At that hour, the streets were full of shadows and distant noises, dripping rooftops, lone barking dogs, engines revving somewhere far away. Hernan walked with his backpack slung over one shoulder, carrying his tools, a hammer, a level, a tape measure, nails, a handsaw wrapped in a towel. He had no contract, no social security, not even a guarantee he'd get paid that day. But still he went every day. On the construction sites, he was known as El Salvita, the little Salvadoran. Some treated him with respect, others with indifference. And there were those who took advantage of his need, offering him less money for more work, pressuring him with impossible deadlines, ridiculing his accent. Hernan never responded. He swallowed his anger, clenched his teeth, and went on carrying beams, mixing concrete, climbing rickety ladders with bags heavier than his faith. His hands were a map of scars, some still raw, others covered by layers of skin as tough as leather. Sometimes his fingers wouldn't cooperate. They trembled at the end of the day when he tried to button his shirt. His knees creaked, his back ached. But each time he thought about quitting, he pictured Camilla reading on the floor, or Andres playing with toy cars, and he pushed himself to keep going. He never asked for anything for himself. No nights out, no new clothes. His only luxury was a small portable radio he used to listen to news from El Salvador while he sat on a corner of the site to eat. He heard about murders, hurricanes, corrupt elections, and felt a guilty sense of relief that he was no longer there. Inside him, one dream kept him going, seeing Camilla and Andres graduate, wearing caps and gowns, walking confidently through the streets of a city that embraced them. He wanted them to soar, free from fear or chains, even if it meant he himself would never have wings. At night, when he came home, he'd find Alma with dinner ready. They'd sit at the small dining table, and although exhaustion often weighed his eyelids down, he always made an effort to listen to the children's stories, pretending excitement when Camilla read her tales, laughing at Andres's jokes, even if he didn't quite get them. He'd ask about their classes, their friends, and their drawings. Once a month, he would hand Alma a $20 bill with a weary smile. "Save it in case of an emergency." "And what if that emergency is you?" she'd reply gently. "I can handle it, Alma. You know I can handle anything." And he could. Hernan endured it all. Exploitation, contempt, fear. Living like a ghost in a country he helped build, but that never acknowledged him. He let his children believe he was strong and invincible, though inside he fell to pieces at the thought of what might happen if one day he didn't make it home. But he never complained. To him, sacrifice was love. And if he had to vanish off the grid, swallow his dignity, live under the constant threat of being torn away from his home, he would do it again and again. Because everything, absolutely everything he did was for them. And although his life was draped in silence, his heart cried out every day with one sacred oath: "For my children, I'd give my very soul." It was a cold November morning, the kind where the wind slips through cracks in the windows, making the curtains dance as though they're trembling. Inside the Ramirez's tiny apartment, everything was calm. Camila slept, hugging an old stuffed animal missing an eye. Andres snored softly, covered head to toe with a blanket. Alma had left a candle burning in the kitchen, just as she did every night, while Hernan finally allowed himself a deep sleep for the first time in a long while. Then that fragile silence, the break they had learned to cherish so much, shattered in an instant. At 3:12 a.m., the roar of engines ripped through the darkness like an unexpected thunderclap. 8 black vehicles, headlights off, aligned themselves in front of the building. One by one, agents in black uniforms climbed out, armed, stern-faced, neither in a hurry nor moving slowly. A surgical operation, cold, precise, with no margin for error. A neighbor watched from a window, secretly recording on his phone. Another neighbor looked on, both curious and relieved. He had made the anonymous call weeks earlier, annoyed by the smell of foreign food and the noise of those kids without papers. In his mind, he saw himself as some kind of vigilante. The first pounding on the door wasn't a knock, it was a threat. "Immigration, open up," a harsh male voice barked, hard as steel. Alma woke up in alarm, instinctively running to the children's rooms. Hernan sat up in bed, confused. For a split second, he thought it was a bad dream, but the echo of boots pounding up the stairs, the flashing lights, and the voices multiplying told him otherwise. "Alma, wake the kids," he said in a low, urgent voice. "Hurry!" His heart pounded in his chest. He jumped to his feet, barefoot and shirtless, heading for the door. There was no time to think, nowhere to hide. Deep down, he knew this was it. When he opened the door, an agent pointed his weapon straight at Hernan's face. "Hernan Ramirez." "Yeah, that's me." The agent didn't respond. He just moved forward and spun Hernan around, slapping handcuffs on him like he was a dangerous criminal. His hands were still cold from sleep. He had no chance to say goodbye, no chance to speak, no chance to explain. Alma ran up, clutching Camilla's hand. The girl was in pink pajamas decorated with little moons. When she saw her father's wrists locked in steel, she let out a heart-wrenching scream that woke the entire building. "Don't take him! He's my dad! Don't take him!" She tried to hug him, but another agent gently held her shoulders back. Camilla resisted, crying and shouting in a voice that couldn't be ignored. Andres appeared behind Alma, half asleep, eyes red from fear, grasping his mother's leg and managing only, "What's happening, Mommy? What's going on?" Hernan saw his children and broke down. The tears came without warning. He tried to speak. "Camila, Andres, I'm sorry. I love you." But they were already dragging him down the hallway. The metal of the handcuffs bit into his skin. He felt the stares of the neighbors through half-open doors, some pitying, some indifferent, some triumphant. When they shoved him into the vehicle, he strained to look back one last time, and that vision was branded into his soul. Alma kneeling in the doorway, hugging her children, trembling, speechless from grief. Camilla's eyes burning with tears, her arms outstretched as though she could touch the sky. Andres, crying in confusion, unable to grasp how the world had suddenly turned so cold. The doors slammed shut with a hollow thud, a sound that split the night in two. For a few moments afterward, the silence returned. But this silence was different. It wasn't the same kind they'd lived with. This was a brutal silence, one that screamed, hurt, and burrowed down into the bones. Inside the apartment, nothing would ever be the same again. Alma wiped away the grime from the boot prints as though that could erase what had happened. She stowed Hernan's tools in the closet. She drew the curtains. And that night, like so many that would follow, she didn't sleep. Camilla curled up in the corner of the living room, clutching her old stuffed animal that no longer smelled like anything, waiting for her dad to walk through the door, hoping this was just a nightmare. But it wasn't. That morning, the Ramirez family didn't just lose a father. They lost the bit of security they had left. From that point on, fear shaped everything. The days after Hernan's arrest felt like a dense fog settling over the apartment, refusing to leave. The walls that once housed bedtime stories and laughter were mute now. The kitchen clock kept ticking, but it seemed to mock them, each minute heavier than the last. Alma had no words. She rose every morning on autopilot, not out of strength. Her hands shook as she made breakfast, not from cold, but from panic. She drank black coffee. She couldn't remember if it was because the sugar ran out or because it just didn't matter anymore. Sometimes she sat at the table, staring into space, twisting a napkin as if trying to hold on to something. But there was nothing to hold on to now that Hernan was gone. Camilla, ever since that night, had stopped speaking. Not by choice. It simply hurt too much to form words. She tried to say "Papa" several times, but her voice would break in a sob. Her childhood world had fractured, and she didn't know how to move through the rubble. She spent hours in the living room corner where her dad used to leave his boots, hugging a threadbare toy that smelled of nothing, but which was now her only refuge. Sometimes she stared at the door with an intensity that broke your heart, as though if she blinked just once, she might see him standing there, smiling in a paint-stained shirt, saying, "I'm home, my girl." But he never came. Andres, at just 6, couldn't put words to his sadness. All he knew was that he couldn't sleep anymore, that every night, when darkness fell, he dreamed of sirens, doors being rammed open, men with guns taking his father away. He started wetting the bed, waking up screaming and clinging to his mother like he did when he was a baby, desperate to hide from the world. Alma did what she could. She never cried in front of the children. She felt she had no right. Falling apart seemed like a luxury she couldn't afford. She had to hold everything together, even if it broke her own shoulders, even if it splintered her soul. She tried calling around, detention centers, immigration offices, churches, but got no answers. Some places didn't even pick up. Others treated her coldly, as though this were just another anonymous case. As if Hernan weren't a human being, but a number in a system unwilling to acknowledge him. Unopened letters began piling up. Unpaid bills stacked higher. The fridge emptied faster. Alma started selling what little they had of value: a watch Hernan once bought at a street fair, a hairdryer, an old coffee maker they didn't even use anymore. A neighbor offered her work cleaning houses under the radar, with no papers or guarantees. Alma accepted, not because she wanted to, but because there was no other way. One night, after the children were asleep, she sat alone in the kitchen. She lit the candle Hernan used to light every evening and placed her hands on the table. In front of her was a faded photo of Hernan holding Camilla as a baby. And for the first time in days, she laid her head on her arms and sobbed. A raw, full-body cry. The kind you have for the dead, even though he was still breathing somewhere. His absence felt like death. She considered returning to El Salvador, packing up what they had, and fleeing, even if it meant restarting in ruins. But something deep inside her, a tiny flicker, reminded her of why they were here in the first place. She recalled the nights Hernan would say, "Alma, if we stay, one day the kids will have a different life, even if we never do." And so she realized she couldn't give up, not for her own sake, not for his, but for Camila and Andres. So she decided to keep going, even if she had to do it alone. Shattered and terrified, life in their little apartment went on, but not as before. Everything was hushed. The windows stayed closed. The lights went out early. They kept their bags ready to run at any moment because danger lurked everywhere. And yet, every night, Alma would look at the sky through the kitchen window, which no longer held that burning candle, and whisper through cracked lips, "Hernan, come back. Please, come back." The following weeks tested their endurance. There was no room to grieve, no space for sadness. Alma became a body that moved out of sheer necessity, barely able to breathe inside. Each new morning, she rose before the children did, dressed in the same hand-washed clothes, and went out looking for answers. She knew that no one would come knocking to help her if she didn't go knocking on doors herself. So she did, one after the other. She went first to a community center where, years before, she had taken Camilla to a reading workshop. Voice trembling, she asked if anyone knew a lawyer or had a number, something. She was handed a wrinkled flyer for an organization helping migrants at risk. When she called, it went straight to an automated message. She never made it through to a real person. She tried churches around the neighborhood, Latino grocery shops, the local market where people knew Hernan and admired him for his friendly greetings. Each place offered brief glimmers of hope that inevitably faded under responses like, "We're sorry, ma'am. He's not showing up in the system. Maybe he was deported already. There's nothing we can do." Every no cut her like a knife. But she pressed on, clinging to the hope that somewhere someone might know something. Sometimes, after cleaning houses for a few dollars, she'd walk to the train station, take a seat on a rusty bench, and watch the waves of faces passing by, wondering if Hernan might be among them, lost in the crowd, if somehow he'd escaped and come searching for them. But he never appeared. Meanwhile, Camilla began to change. The girl who had gone silent for weeks woke up one morning, picked up paper and pencil, and wrote a letter. It was short. "Dad, I don't know where you are, but I'm going to find you. I'm going to study hard and become someone important. And then I'll bring you back. I love you. Your daughter, Camilla." She left it on the pillow where he used to sleep. That same night, she wrote another one, and another. Soon she was writing letters every day. She kept them in an old shoebox, covered in magazine clippings. Each was a little piece of her heart, wrapped in hope. "Do you think he can read them from wherever he is, Mommy?" she asked one night while Alma braided her hair. "Yes, sweetie," Alma replied, struggling not to cry. "I'm sure he can." Sometimes Camilla would place the box on the windowsill, as though the wind itself could carry her words to him, as though thoughts had wings. At school, she started writing short stories about separated families and heroes who crossed deserts to be with their kids. Her teachers noticed the depth of her writing. One asked her, moved, if it was fiction. Camilla lowered her eyes. "No, it's my life." In the midst of sorrow, this little girl had found her voice, a way to transform the emptiness into something less painful. Andres still asked every night, "When is Dad coming back?" And Alma gave her usual answer, "Very soon, sweetie, very soon." But truthfully, she didn't know. Then one afternoon, as she picked up the kids from school, her cheap cell phone rang with an unknown number. She hesitated, but answered. A man's voice, formally neutral, spoke words that made her blood run cold. "Mrs. Alma Ramirez, your husband was deported 2 weeks ago. No hearing, no defense. He's already in El Salvador. Just letting you know. Good day." Before she could reply, the call ended. Alma froze on the sidewalk, with her children right beside her. As the ground seemed to disappear, time stopped. There was no maybe anymore, no more waiting. It was final. He was gone, taken from them. That night, back at home, Alma didn't turn on the lights. She sat in the darkness with the shoebox of letters on her lap, while Camilla watched her wide-eyed, searching for a clue. Gently, Alma placed her hand on the box and said, "Keep writing to him, Camilla. He can't call us right now, but I'm sure he hears you. And one day, you'll bring him back." Camilla nodded, her face resolute, tears drying in her eyes as determination flickered in them. That night, she wrote one more letter, signing it, for the first time, with different words. "Your daughter, who never gives up." The plane landed with a jolt, as though the runway itself were rejecting it. Hernan had no luggage, no bag, no suitcase, just a battered manila folder holding papers he barely understood, and a borrowed shirt they gave him at the detention center so he'd be presentable. Nobody was there to meet him, not even the land of his birth. If you're enjoying this story, remember to hit like, subscribe, and activate notifications to stay up to date with all of our content. El Salvador greeted him with the same scorching sun as always, but he was no longer the same man. His accent, his walk, even the way he looked around felt out of place. The years away had eroded his sense of belonging. He drifted through the airport like a ghost among the living, hearing familiar sounds and smelling familiar scents. Yet everything felt foreign, like a distant dream. A cousin of his mother's, someone he barely remembered, picked him up in a beat-up truck. There was no hug, just a curt handshake and a brusque comment. "You can stay here for a few days, but then you'll have to figure it out on your own." The room where he spent his first night was a cramped space behind a makeshift kitchen, with a bed frame but no mattress, and only a curtain for a door. The walls were dripping with mildew, and water seeped through the roof when it rained. There was no privacy, no silence, no comfort, just noise, heat, and mosquitoes. But Hernan didn't complain. He never did. He just sat down, stared at his empty hands, and whispered, "I'm alive. For now, that's enough." He tried to find work, but everything felt different. Nobody wanted to hire an older man coming from somewhere else. They eyed him with suspicion, seeing him as a walking failure. They called him El Gringo, not respectfully but mockingly. His Salvadoran papers had expired. He had no bank account, no fixed address, no stable phone number. Once again, he was nobody. He tried reconnecting with old acquaintances, but most had left or forgotten him. The streets where he'd played as a child were now dangerous gang territories. Walking 2 blocks with the wrong look could get you killed, so Hernan barely spoke. He kept his head down, only going out for bread and then returning right away. Nighttime was the hardest. Sleeping on a thin mat, with a fan that barely moved and the sounds of the neighborhood pouring through the broken window, shouts, distant gunshots, barking dogs. On those sleepless nights, he'd stare at the ceiling and think about Camilla, her laughter, the smell of her hair, the last time he held her, and he'd picture Andres searching for him in the chaos, and Alma's trembling hands. Are they eating enough? Are they safe? Who reads them bedtime stories now? Without a phone or a proper address, he couldn't write them, not even a simple note. The silence was complete. Sometimes he'd sit outside the house on a broken plastic chair, gazing at the sky, counting the stars though he didn't know their names. One night, while fixated on one star shining brighter than the others, he whispered, "Camilla, my love, I'll come back, even if I have to walk, even if it takes my whole life." He meant it. No matter how far, no matter how impossible it seemed, he refused to give up. It wasn't just the distance, it was the shame, the helplessness of having failed, of being torn from his family like an unwanted object, unable to protect them, returning to his homeland empty-handed, replaying the image of his kids, watching him being taken away. Each passing day without news felt like punishment, yet he still believed, at least in some small way. A tiny, flickering voice inside insisted his story didn't end there, that there was still a road ahead, that Camilla would keep her promise. That faint hope, like a dying ember in the darkness, was all he had to keep him moving. And so Hernan, once an invisible laborer, became an exile in his own land, wounded and lost, yet still on his feet. 8 years passed after that night when Camilla's screams failed to stop the immigration agents. 8 years that didn't pass quietly, but instead carved invisible scars into the soul of a child who was a child no longer. Camilla grew up with her father's absence as a constant shadow. She learned to live with it, to coexist with that emptiness without letting it devour her. It wasn't easy. At school, she avoided answers whenever someone asked about her parents. Some teachers assumed her father had died. Others believed he had abandoned them. She didn't bother correcting anyone. She couldn't explain what she herself hardly understood. Over time, though, something within Camilla began to change, slowly, like water sculpting stone. At 13, she started reading books about civil rights and leaders who had fought injustice. She found echoes of her own story in their words, similar tears, suppressed rage. Each time she read about people who spoke out and managed to create change, no matter how small, she felt a new strength rise up in her chest. It was as if the letters she'd written all those years had planted a seed of destiny inside her, which was now beginning to grow. At 14, she attended her first writing workshop. There, she shared one of her pieces, a letter with no addressee, about a father taken away, a little girl shattered, and a country that wouldn't listen. The room fell silent. At the end, the teacher hugged her and said, "You have a story that needs to be told, Camilla, and you have the voice to tell it." From that moment on, her life changed course. She kept writing, reading, and most importantly, speaking out, first in small community groups, then at school events, and later in church meetings about migration and human dignity. Her story, once an intimate tragedy, began to spread. Camilla became a young woman who spoke softly but firmly, sometimes crying while telling her story, though not from weakness. It was a piercing kind of courage. By 17, she'd received a partial scholarship to a local university. She washed dishes in a restaurant in the evenings to cover the rest. She slept little, ate just enough, but lived with purpose. Her bedroom in the cramped apartment she still shared with Alma and Andres was a shrine of memories, faded childhood photos, newspaper clippings about immigration, and in one special corner, the shoebox full of letters she had written to her father over the past 8 years. Each was numbered, some stained with tears, some illustrated with drawings, some covered with questions yet to be answered. Camilla decided to study law, not out of ambition, but necessity. She wanted to understand the system that had taken so much from them. She wanted to dismantle from within the cold machine that tore fathers like hers from their families without a second thought. She carried a blue notebook to every class, filling it with ideas for projects, speeches, even legal documents. Some days, she doubted herself, felt tired or sad enough to give up. But then she'd open the box, reread a letter, and remember who she was and why she was there. "I promised I'd bring you back," she reminded herself. That promise burned in her heart like an unquenchable flame. 14-year-old Andres admired her in silence. He got up early to walk with her to the bus stop when he could. He drew pictures for her, once a crude sketch of Hernan with the three of them standing around him. Above it, in big letters, he wrote, "This is our happy ending. I believe it." Alma watched Camilla with a pride that almost hurt. She knew her daughter was becoming more than a student. She was becoming a natural leader, a beacon in the midst of a storm still raging. Camilla didn't become an activist by choice, but by necessity. Soon, her name started circulating in circles she never imagined. She was invited to community conferences on youth and migration. Standing before an audience, heart in her throat, and a letter in her hand, she began to speak up. She read letter number 1, the first she ever wrote at 10 years old, during one of these events. The crowd fell silent, then erupted in applause, some in tears, others reaching out to hug her, strangers who felt she was their own daughter. That moment was filmed by a volunteer who uploaded it with the caption, "A deported father's daughter reading the letter she wrote to him. This story must not be silenced." The video blew up. Within hours, it had been shared thousands of times. By the next day, it had millions of views. It went viral not just for the message, but for how she conveyed it. No shouting, no anger, just a raw emotional power no one could ignore. Then came the flood of comments. "This girl is braver than an entire Congress. Where's her dad? We can't let this happen. I'm crying at work. This is real." It happens every day, and people look away. One of those who watched was attorney Julian Ortega, a veteran immigration lawyer with over 20 years' experience and a reputation for fighting unfair deportations. He saw the video late one night while scrolling through social media in his downtown LA office. When it finished, he stood, pale and teary-eyed, and called his assistant, "Find this young woman, right now. This is a legal travesty." We're reopening that case. Without knowing it, Camilla had set something much bigger in motion. Within days, various NGOs reached out, offering help. Immigration advocacy groups wanted to look into Hernan's case. A community lawyer who'd heard her story in a local church also joined the effort. They began gathering evidence, collecting signatures, searching for witnesses from the raid, and discovered Hernan had been deported without a formal hearing or legal defense, a direct violation of due process. That fact changed everything. Working with his team, Julian Ortega filed a motion to reopen Hernan's case and requested temporary humanitarian parole for him, arguing he was a victim of due process violations, pointing out the hasty deportation, the lack of basic rights, and the emotional harm inflicted on his children. Camilla, for her part, published all her letters online, one by one, scanned by hand, unedited, with her childhood misspellings intact, with each drawing, with each date. She posted them on a page called Letters to My Dad, alongside brief reflections, old photos, and messages of hope. The response was overwhelming. Thousands of young people started sharing their own stories, many just as heartbreaking, some still without resolution. Camilla realized she wasn't alone, never had been. The only difference was that now, people were watching and listening. In a TV interview, when asked if she thought all the pain was worth it, she answered with quiet resolve, "If my story can keep another little girl from seeing her father taken away like that, then yes, it's worth it. And we're not done yet." The day arrived without warning. A call in the afternoon, a formal voice, and words that felt like a dream. Mr. Hernan Ramirez has been granted temporary re-entry under supervision. The reunion will take place at Los Angeles International Airport tomorrow, 8 a.m. Alma dropped the phone on the floor. Camilla, who was washing dishes, saw her mother's hands fly to her mouth in disbelief. Through tears, Alma just kept repeating, "Camilla, your dad is coming back." Camilla didn't sleep that night, didn't even try. She stayed up in bed, shoebox on her lap, reading the letters one by one, each word written with a broken heart, every promise made in nights of cold now about to meet reality. She woke before dawn, went to the closet, and dug out an old pink pajama set with moons and stars, the same one she'd worn the night they took her father. It was faded, the sleeves too short, but it was now a badge of honor. She slipped it on under her coat. Andres, now 14, put on a white t-shirt and made a sign that read in large letters, "Welcome home, Dad." The airport was all buzz and bright lights. Camilla felt her heart might burst from her chest. TV cameras, volunteers, community members, everyone waited, but she saw none of it. All she could focus on was the international arrivals door, where any second now, that single figure she'd dreamed about for 8 years would appear. Then it happened. The door slid open, slowly. A federal officer stepped out first, expression blank. Behind him, walking with a measured pace, shirt rumpled and eyes shining with emotion, was Hernan. Time had changed him. His hair was grayer, his body thinner. But it was him, her dad, her hero, her foundation. Camilla took a step forward, then another, and then she ran. "Dad!" When Hernan saw her, he dropped to his knees as though he couldn't bear the sheer weight of that love. He opened his arms and sobbed, "My little girl! Camilla, you've grown so much. You're so beautiful." Camilla hugged him as though her life depended on it, clinging to him with the force of someone reclaiming what the world had tried to steal. They held each other wordlessly. Language wasn't enough for that moment. Andres joined them seconds later, tears falling silently as he threw his arms around them. A few steps away was Alma, hands covering her face, shaking. When she finally drew near, Hernan looked at her with eyes fuller than they'd ever been. They didn't need words. The four of them embraced there, in front of everyone, cameras and onlookers from across the country. They were a family, reunited, a promise kept, a human miracle. Cameras captured the exact moment Camilla handed her father the shoebox. Hernan took it in trembling hands, pressing it to his chest, eyes closed. "Did you write all these?" he asked. "Yes, Dad. Every single one, since you left." He clutched the box against his heart, not needing to open it to understand what it held. He'd felt those letters in every lonely night, in every star he'd studied from El Salvador. That family embrace, as if stopping time, went viral within hours. Millions watched, millions cried alongside them, and millions realized that behind every deportation number, every file, are real lives. Hearts and children like Camilla, fathers like Hernan, stories we can no longer ignore. Hernan's permit was temporary. The legal process continued. But none of that mattered right then, because after 8 long years, he was sleeping under the same roof as his family. That night, in the cramped apartment where it all began, Camilla placed a letter on the table containing only one sentence. "I promised I'd bring you back. I did, but this is only the beginning." Life didn't go back to how it was before, because after a wound that deep, nothing is ever quite the same. But that doesn't mean it can't be beautiful, or even stronger. Hernan awoke on his first morning back not entirely sure it was real. The ceiling was the same, yet different. The table, the dishes, the cooking smells, all held the taste of what was once lost and now found. He ran his fingers along the walls as though touching something sacred. He stopped in front of the doorway where he'd been taken that fateful night, breathed in, and wept silently. "I'm home," he whispered. Camilla watched from the kitchen, letting him have that moment, aware that her father was relearning how to be there, reclaiming the place he should never have lost. His legal situation was still unresolved. He had to meet with officials, sign paperwork, and undergo supervision, but he wasn't alone. Camilla stood by him every step of the way, helping him pass the documents, defending him with the same fierce resolve that once fueled her letters. "Are you really going to be a lawyer?" he asked one night as they watched TV. "Yes, Dad. And I'm going to use everything we went through to keep it from happening to anyone else." Alma now worked at a local bakery, a job secured through a neighbor who knew her story. She started at 5 each morning, coming home smelling of sweet bread and fresh coffee. The home once again smelled like hope. Andres, 14, spoke of his dreams aloud. "I want to be a firefighter, Dad. I want to save people like nobody saved you." "You'll save a lot of lives, son," Hernan said, ruffling his hair. "You're saving mine just by being here." Sundays became a family ritual. Breakfast together, soft music, a trip to the park. Hernan kept the shoebox on the back seat of the car, sometimes pulling out a random letter to read, then gazing at Camilla as though he still couldn't believe she was right there. Occasionally, he'd just hug her without warning. "What's going on, Dad?" she'd ask. Nothing, sweetheart, just making sure this isn't a dream. Some nights, fear returned. Alma's hands trembled whenever an envelope from the government arrived. Camilla struggled to sleep if she heard a siren. Hernan had nightmares, waking up drenched in sweat, certain he was locked away again. But then he'd open his eyes and see Andres asleep at his side, Camilla studying with her headphones on, and Alma humming softly in the kitchen. He'd take a breath and remind himself, this is worth it, every second, every tear, every blow. Reporters kept calling. NGOs wanted to use their case as a model. But Camilla drew a line. We aren't just a case. We're a family. Now we want to live in peace. Still, their story was already part of something bigger. In universities, her letters were studied as testimonial literature. In courtrooms, her case was cited as a prime example of due process violations. Her name appeared in articles, at panels, in places of influence. But she remained focused. Study, defend, fight, and love. Hernan's final hearing was still pending. It could take years, maybe bring surprises. But this time, they weren't alone, and they weren't afraid of being seen. Camilla kept writing, but no longer for a father who was gone. Now her letters were for other daughters, other sons, those still waiting. On the last page of her new notebook, she wrote a line marking the start of a fresh chapter. Our home is full of cracks, but that's where the light gets in. And so, life went on, with scars, yes, but also with love, with resilience, with remembrance, and above all else, with hope. If you love this story, you'll surely enjoy the next one that appears on your screen. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, give us a like, and turn on notifications. See you next time.